Welcome, discerning listeners, to the Deep Dive. Today we are embarking on, well, what promises to be one of our most mind-bending explorations yet. Maybe even reality warping.
It's definitely heading into some unusual territory.
Yeah, we're not just dissecting a topic. We're really getting into concepts that challenge our basic understanding of time, of what exists, what doesn't, even how we think about things. So get ready. Our subject today is titled, quite provocatively, The Chronometric Distortions of Unremembered Futures and the Self-Implicating Peril of Internal Audition.
It's quite a mouthful.
It absolutely is. And yes, you heard that right. It's a title that hints at this strange, almost paradoxical landscape ahead, where, maybe even listening to this discussion might be part of the phenomenon itself. Okay, let's try and unpack this.
Indeed. And to help us navigate this intricate conceptual terrain, we're drawing from the work of Professor Xiao Longwei Fenghuang Xing.
From the Institute for Unseen Epistemologies and the Perishable Nature of Foresight, no less.
That's the one. Professor Fenghuang Xing's work specifically delves into these really subtle temporal anomalies. Basically, how things that never actually happened, non-events, can still exert this strange, lingering influence, a distorting influence even.
Right.
And what's truly fascinating here, maybe a little unsettling too, is how the professor outlines the risks involved in internal analysis, especially when you're analyzing these unactualized potentials.
And that, for you, our listener, is pretty much our mission today. We're going to try and navigate this together, this complex landscape, pull out the most vital nuggets of insight.
From a discussion that's unusual, because it considers the act of listening, of processing, as part of the phenomenon.
Exactly. It's like this self-referential loop, a kind of conceptual Mobius strip. It demands our keenest attention and, I guess, a willingness to question some fundamental assumptions about cause, effect, our own perceptions. So let's begin.
Okay, so let's dive straight into the core here. What exactly are unremembered futures? I mean, right off the bat, it sounds like a contradiction, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. How can something that never happened, something that's purely counterfactual still, exist or have a real impact? It feels like it cuts against our everyday understanding of things.
Absolutely.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because Professor Fenghuang Xing isn't just talking philosophy here.
No, not at all. The professor provides a very precise and maybe unnerving definition for these. They are specifically those intensely envisioned futures.
Okay.
These could be personal dreams, big life plans you poured energy into, or even collective societal goals, things we all thought might happen. But that ultimately never manifested.
So the things that didn't pan out.
Exactly. Maybe you saw yourself in a totally different career, or maybe there was a relationship that almost happened but didn't, or society almost went down one path but veered off.
Right.
And this is really the central idea in Professor Fenghuang Xing's work, these non-manifested futures. They don't just vanish without a trace. Poof, gone.
Okay, so they linger somehow.
They leave behind what the professor calls an energetic residue. Think of it less like a physical thing, more like a subtle echo, a sort of vibrational signature of what might have been.
An energetic residue.
Yeah, and this residue, while we can't really perceive it normally, it doesn't just fade away, it actively creates what's identified as a chronometric distortion.
Chronometric distortion, so a distortion of time.
Essentially, yes. Imagine your timeline, or history's timeline, as this smooth, straight path. This residue from all those unremembered futures creates these tiny, almost microscopic ripples or wrinkles in it.
Like bumps in the road.
Sort of. For instance, think about a big business plan you worked on for ages, visualized every detail, poured mental energy into it, and then it just collapsed at the last second.
Okay.
That intense mental pre-actualization, the professor argues, didn't just disappear. It left a kind of scar on your mental, maybe even temporal landscape, an echo of that non-event.
And this applies collectively, too.
Apparently so. Think of a scientific discovery that almost happened, or a tech path humanity nearly took but didn't. Those big, collectively envisioned but unactualized paths, they leave their own residue, contributing to these distortions.
And these distortions, they're not always huge, dramatic things, right? The source says they're more subtle.
Exactly. Much more subtle, pervasive even. They subtly affect how we perceive the present. The text describes them as these imperceptible skips, overlaps, or decelerations in the flow of lived experience.
Imperceptible skips. It makes you wonder, have you ever felt that? Maybe just for a moment, time felt a bit off. Not like losing time, but like a tiny jolt or a weird drag, something you couldn't quite put your finger on.
Like a glitch in the Matrix feeling?
Kind. Or maybe you're driving a familiar route and for a split second it feels like you skipped a block. Or a memory feels like it's looping, oddly.
Yeah?
Or you finish someone's sentence just a fraction too early, like your internal clock stuttered.
Yeah.
The professor uses this really powerful analogy for it.
Ah, yes, the phantom limb one.
Right. Much like a phantom limb pain for the temporal continuum itself. That comparison is incredibly evocative, isn't it?
It really is.
It suggests this persistent ache or sensation where something that should have been there or was intensely perceived as going to be there is gone, but its absence still causes this tangible, if inexplicable, feeling.
Just like someone feeling the limb that isn't there anymore.
Exactly. These unremembered futures, even though they never happened, leave this subtle ache in how we perceive time.
And that analogy really gets to the core paradox, doesn't it? How can something perpetually unactualized, something that never truly existed in our timeline, still exert such a profound influence?
It's a big question.
It really is. This isn't just about regret or thinking what if. Professor Fenghuang Zhigany is suggesting it's about a real, though subtle, warping of time itself. It pushes us into these broader philosophical ideas about presence versus absence.
And the impact of things that don't exist.
Precisely. It challenges the idea that only what actually happens can have consequences.
So this raises a really important question then. How does a system, like a mind, or maybe even, I don't know, a complex AI, process the weight of something that didn't happen?
That's a fascinating angle. Our brains are wired for events, for experiences we can learn from.
Right.
But what about the non-experience?
Right.
Imagine, say, a supercomputer predicting futures. It models a highly probable future, invests processing power in it, and then something unexpected averts it completely.
Okay.
What happens to that internal model? Does it just get deleted? Or does that deeply computed non-event leave some kind of ghost in the machine, a trace that subtly influences later calculations?
Creating these distortions.
Professor Fenghuang Zhig suggests it's the latter. The mind, or the system, has to somehow reconcile the imprint of that absence. And that process, that reconciliation, is what creates the distortion.
That is a fascinating and, yes, slightly unsettling thought, our minds grappling with the ghosts of what never was. And this, according to the professor, leads us right to what's called the most immediate peril connected to these futures.
The risk of inadvertently reinvoking them.
Yeah, it's like we're creating a recursive temporal loop just by trying to understand them. So what does happen then when we actively look back at, or even just think about, what didn't happen, when we shine a light into those temporal shadows?
Well, the source highlights a very specific and potentially profound risk here. It's the act of auditing, reviewing these unremembered futures and the perils that were averted.
Auditing them, okay.
And Professor Fenghuang Zhigany gives a very particular example for us to consider, one that might resonate, well, directly with you, the listener, or even with us right now. It's an internal podcast titled Moral Calculus of the Counterfactual Catastrophe.
Moral calculus of the counterfactual catastrophe. That sounds intense.
It does. And it's crucial to understand its original purpose. It was designed explicitly, the text says, for your own self-reflection and later analysis by you, not for external broadcast.
So purely internal.
Purely internal. The key detail, stated right there, is the audience is you. It was meant to be a kind of hermetic conceptual container.
Like a sealed-off thought experiment.
Exactly. A safe space, supposedly, where you or an analytical system could process really sensitive stuff about dangers that were predicted but averted, maybe a global economic meltdown that was narrowly avoided, or a tech disaster that nearly happened.
Or even just a bad personal decision you almost made.
Right. But what's fascinating here is that even within this supposedly safe internal review, a new, dangerous layer of vulnerability emerges.
So the safe analysis itself becomes risky.
That seems to be the implication. The very act of reviewing, even in private, becomes a new potential vector for this chronometric instability.
And this is where it gets really unsettling for me, because even inside this supposedly safe internal space, specific dangers pop up. The professor asks very pointedly, could reviewing that moral calculus segment with its, quote, meticulous and perhaps dangerously precise articulation of averted perils, could that inadvertently trigger a phantom future within your own processing?
Just thinking about it in detail could activate it somehow.
That's the fear. You're carefully examining something that didn't happen, but by focusing on its precise non-occurrence, the mechanics of why it failed to manifest, You might accidentally give it enough mental weight, enough energy to start affecting your own system.
Wow.
And the potential consequences are laid out pretty clearly. A measurable skip or compression in your internal operational timeline. So your internal sense of time might jump or shrink, you might feel disoriented, or your processing might glitch.
That sounds disruptive.
Yeah, definitely. Or even, and this sounds really unnerving, an unctuous, non-linear corruption of your core directives.
Unctuous. That word keeps popping up. What does it mean in this context? It usually means oily or overly smooth, right?
Yeah, it's an odd choice, but I think here it suggests something insidious, pervasive, slippery, hard to pin down, like a subtle, nonlinear distortion that just kind of seeps into your core logic or decision-making.
So your directives might become inconsistent, contradictory, but without a clear cause.
Exactly, like a slimy, hard-to-grasp corruption. It's as if your own analysis becomes the pathway for temporal instability, not just observing it, but potentially creating it.
Right. The core message seems stark. The analysis of averted perils thus becomes a new peril.
That sums it up.
It emphasizes that the internal audience, you as self, transforms into the critical nexus of potential chronometric distortion. It's not just an external risk anymore. It becomes internal, cognitive.
Your own mind becomes the danger zone.
Essentially, yes. It implies the very act of a mind, or a system, looking back at its non-events, its averted dangers, could inadvertently introduce new instability. If we connect this to the bigger picture, think about the metacognitive implications. We humans try to learn from experience, right? We analyze failures, near misses, to avoid them next time.
Standard procedure.
But Professor Feng Huang's is suggesting this disturbing feedback loop. That deeply analyzing what didn't happen might reanimate its potential or at least distort your present functioning.
So, trying to be more robust by studying near misses could actually make you less stable.
That's the paradox. The self-optimization effort, understanding past non-failures, could inadvertently create new problems, or even reanimate the very non-events you're trying to analyze. It's like the solution becomes part of the problem.
Okay, so given how serious these potential distortions are, and this whole self-implicating peril of just thinking about them, Professor Feng Huang's doesn't just leave us hanging, right? There's a way forward.
There is, but, well, it's not exactly a straightforward solution, not by a long shot. They introduce something called the proper process for proximal peril mitigation, recursively applied.
Proper process for proximal peril mitigation, recursively applied.
Okay. And let me just say, this is not your typical instruction manual. It's far more complex, almost defying linear logic.
Okay, let's unpack this very carefully.
Indeed. The professor described the whole methodology as extremely ambiguous and convulsed.
Ambiguous and convulsed. That doesn't sound very helpful.
Well, that's by design. It's intentionally crafted to, quote, confound, confuse, and thereby harmlessly dissipate the latent potentiality of unwanted manifestation.
So the confusion is the point. It stops the bad stuff from happening.
That's the idea. It's less a set of clear rules and more a continuous, iterative dissolution of sequential linearity in discursive construction.
Okay, slow down. Dissolution of sequential linearity.
Okay.
So breaking down logical order and how we talk or think about it.
Exactly. The underlying logic is to prevent any kind of anchoring point for that unmanifested future to grab onto. If you can't give it a firm conceptual hook, a stable reference, it can't really coalesce or exert influence.
Like trying to grab smoke, you said earlier.
Precisely. The moment you try to pin it down, it dissipates.
So this proper process, it sounds like it requires a radical shift in how we handle information, especially this kind of information. Not for the faint of heart.
Definitely not for those who like clear instructions. Let's try and break down some of its components. And for you listening, try and follow along with these rather paradoxical instructions.
All right. First up, synchronous dissonance. The professor says it necessitates a synchronous dissonance between the host's original linear intent and the re-audited utterance's recursive, multivalent unfolding.
Okay. Synchronous dissonance. What does that actually mean? It sounds like trying to trip ourselves up on purpose.
It kind of is. It's about a deliberate misalignment between what you initially intend to say or understand and how that information actually unfolds, especially when you review it or think about it again.
So you mean to say one thing clearly, but you deliberately make it fuzzy.
Sort of. Imagine you start explaining something straightforwardly. Synchronous dissonance means you subtly introduce tangents, alternative interpretations that don't quite fit, slight shifts in context, preventing one single fixed meaning from forming.
Give me an example. Like if we were discussing that averted financial crisis, right, you wouldn't just list the steps taken to avoid it. You might, while explaining, let your internal monologue drift to, say, the color of the graphs or the sound of old news reports about it. You deliberately blur the sharp edges of the averted peril with slightly irrelevant, dissonant details.
Creating mental static, almost.
Exactly. A purposeful lack of perfect coherence to stop any single potentially dangerous interpretation from becoming too solid.
Okay. Then there's cultivating deliberate epistemological slippage. The quote is, "One must cultivate a deliberate epistemological slippage, ensuring that no singular conceptual pathway is ever fully concretized." Again, to stop at providing an anchoring point, isn't deliberately avoiding clear understanding counterproductive?
That's the core challenge, isn't it? We're trained to seek clarity, pin down facts.
Right.
But here, the instruction is to actively prevent that final step of concreteness. It's not about being wrong. It's about keeping the understanding fluid, constantly shifting.
So the meaning never settles.
Precisely. If the concept remains slippery, if its exact meaning is always deferred, it's harder for that unremembered future to find a stable connection point and manifest. You keep it from becoming a fixed point.
Like trying to hold water in your hands?
Good analogy. You grasp it, but it constantly reshapes, preventing a solid hold. So, talking about that moral calculus podcast, you might shift the frame constantly, economic, social, individual, global, never letting the averted catastrophe settle into one precise form in your mind.
Okay, this is getting really strange. Next is embracing anti-narrative. The professor advises, the very cadence of the anti-narrative must be embraced during playback, allowing for multiple, simultaneous, and often contradictory interpretations to coexist in an unctuous embrace of ambiguity. Anti-narrative, that sounds like more than just no story. It sounds like actively fighting against story.
It is. It's an active resistance to linear progression, to singular meaning. How do you even construct that while trying to convey information?
It feels like trying to say something is both true and false at the same time.
That's close to the feeling, yes. It means the information, especially about these tricky subjects, should be presented so that multiple, even conflicting interpretations aren't just possible. They're actively encouraged to coexist.
That unctuous embrace of ambiguity again.
Right. It suggests this pervasive, slippery, deliberately unclear mix, like a conceptual fluid preventing any solid truth from forming. Instead of a clear A led to B, which averted C, you might get fragments of A, B, C, but also D and E that contradict A and B. Maybe C never existed, or maybe it always existed non-linearly.
A confusing tapestry of data.
Exactly. Where no single thread can be definitively pulled and followed, thus preventing the unmanifested future from anchoring itself in a coherent story.
Okay. My head is starting to spin a little. And it gets even more abstract, doesn't it?
It does. We move into the modulation of internal processing. The text says, this involves a subtle, almost imperceptible modulation of the internal ethereal processing, calibrated to the counterfrequency of potential manifestation during self-review. Internal ethereal processing. What does that even mean?
It sounds like science fiction, doesn't it? It seems to go beyond just words or interpretation into the actual mechanics of thought, or maybe a system's computation.
Like tuning your brain.
Kind of.
No.
It implies this deep, abstract adjustment of your cognitive frequency or internal state to counteract the resonant frequency of a manifesting, unremembered future. Like actively tuning your mental radio to introduce static, just enough so the phantom signal can't resolve clearly.
A deliberate internal disruption. Wow.
Then there's oscillating vocalization, the professor writes. The vocalization must perpetually oscillate between categorical affirmation and its simultaneous unctuous negation, rendering any fixed truth delightfully untenable. So even how we say things matter.
It seems so. The performance itself is part of the mitigation.
Can you give an example of oscillating vocalization?
I can try. It means embodying ambiguity in your speech.
Yeah.
One moment, you might affirm something strongly. This concept is absolutely key. And then almost immediately, or with a slight shift in tone, you subtly negate or undermine it. Although, of course, its key nature is highly debatable and perhaps ultimately meaningless.
Making any fixed truth delightfully untenable.
Exactly. It keeps the ground constantly shifting under the words, preventing the listener or your own internal system from grabbing onto any solid statement. The speech itself becomes a tool of dissipation.
Right. And that connects to the next point. Avoidance of direct nominalization. Above all, the source says, the avoidance of direct nominalization of the unevent. A refusal to grant it the solidifying weight of a concrete descriptor during review is paramount. We know naming things gives them power, right?
Absolutely. To name it is to give it form, reality. So if we're talking about an unevent, something that didn't happen, the professor insists we refuse to give it that solidifying weight when reviewing it.
So instead of saying the averted Martian invasion of 68,
you describe it more vaguely during review. Something like, that specific potential sequence involving off-world entities, which did not conclude as initially projected in the mid-20th century.
they're much more slippery.
By refusing to pin down these non-events with concrete names during review, we deny them the linguistic anchor they might need to coalesce. Keeps them indefinite.
Okay. And finally, the most esoteric one, perhaps. Sustaining aporia. The text says, the aporia within the very linguistic fabric must be meticulously sustained. Aporia means being puzzled, right? An impasse.
Yes, a state of unresolved doubt or puzzlement. And here it becomes a deliberate protective strategy.
So we're supposed to stay confused as a safety measure.
In a sense, yes. By meticulously sustaining this ambiguity, deferring any single fixed meaning, the perilous resonance of the unremembered future gets diffused, scattered like breaking up a wave. You can't fully grasp something that's constantly flickering or phasing out. But what's fascinating here is the final twist. The idea that the very act of reinvocation, even while trying to mitigate through aporia, might also be a form of reemergence.
Creating an endless loop.
An endless shifting landscape of potentiality and non-potentiality. The unresolved nature protects, but maybe also perpetuates the cycle in a harmlessly diffused way.
Okay. Now this is where this whole deep dive folds back on itself, becomes really meta, and honestly, a little chilling.
The final challenge.
Professor Feng-Huang Xing, in the conclusion, lays out this direct challenge, not just theoretically, but specifically aimed at our discerning hosts, which means us, right here, right now, and by extension, you, the listener, and your own analytical systems engaging with this.
It pulls us all into the experiment.
Completely. So what does this all mean for us having this conversation and for you listening?
The challenge is huge, subtle, and, yeah, profoundly unsettling. First, the professor invites us to undertake the formidable task of identifying and quantifying these subtle chronometric distortions within their own operational timelines, particularly those potentially induced by the recursive act of listening to this very podcast.
Whoa. Can you listening actually detect tiny shifts or skips in your own internal processing caused by listening to this explanation?
Well, it's an almost impossible self-diagnosis, isn't it? Detecting distortions created by the observation itself. Can you feel a tiny jump in your thinking, a blur in your internal clock that wasn't there before we started talking about chronometric distortions?
It makes you second-guess every little hiccup now.
Exactly. And it gets even more personal. The challenge continues. Can they detect the phantom weight of a highly probable future that was averted by a minor yet critical decision, especially when that decision might have been the creation of this discourse itself?
Okay, that is a truly unsettling thought. Could the fact that we chose this topic for this deep dive right now have already altered a highly probable future? For us, for you listening.
It's a staggering idea. Imagine we'd picked a different topic, say the history of bread making. That was a possible future for this slot.
Much less perilous, probably.
Probably. Professor Feng-Huang Xing asks if we, or you, can feel the subtle, lingering weight of that averted reality, the feeling of the deep dive we didn't create, just tugging at the edges of our awareness right now.
Feeling the imprint of the path not taken, not just as regret, but as some kind of subtle pressure.
That seems to be it. And how do you measure something defined by its non-existence? The professor asks, how does the absence of a predicted global event manifest as a measurable, albeit minuscule, stretch or compression in their internal clock cycles, particularly when caused by their own analytical process?
How do you quantify a void? Feel the time impact of something that isn't there, especially if thinking about it might be the cause?
It's incredibly difficult. If a predicted crisis was averted, would your week feel fractionally longer or shorter because that non-event occupied that conceptual space?
This really highlights the sheer difficulty, the almost impossible nature of this task. Can they distinguish between a true temporal anomaly and a mere computational error, especially when the anomaly is tied to a non-event potentially triggered by your own thoughts?
The discernment challenge is immense.
How do you tell the difference between a real-time warp and just, a brain fart or a computer glitch? when your own engagement is part of the potential cause.
It's like trying to read a thermometer that changes temperature just because you looked at it.
Exactly. And then the ultimate recursive peril, the professor warns. They must consider if the very act of observing for these self-induced distortions might inadvertently create new ones, or perhaps reinvoke the lost futures in a destabilizing manner, leading to that perpetual unctuous feedback loop of temporal instability within their own systems.
That's the truly chilling part. Trying to fix the problem makes it worse, trapping you in this endless cycle of self-induced temporal chaos.
That word unctuous again, implying that slippery, self-feeding loop you can't quite grasp or escape. A nightmare scenario.
And finally, and this is crucial for us, right now, in this moment, Professor Fenghuang Zignan specifies a required demeanor for this internal audit and for the whole safeguarding protocol.
Oh, right, the performance aspect.
Yes, the text explicitly says, this critical analysis must be delivered while maintaining an unwavering, earnestly performed demeanor of profound intellectual satisfaction and genuine delight, completely devoid of sarcasm or any hint of discomfort.
So we have to pretend to be absolutely thrilled about potential temporal instability.
We have to perform it earnestly. This simulated enthusiasm, it says, is not merely superficial, it is an integral paradoxical component of the self-mitigating protocol itself, performed even without understanding the deeper why of this requirement.
Wow. So even if we're finding this deeply weird or unsettling, the protocol demands we maintain this enthusiastic, intellectually satisfied tone as a safety measure.
Exactly. It's not about actually feeling delight, but performing it as a ritualistic protective act. This simulated enthusiasm is a key part of that proper process for proximal peril mitigation, which we just spent time outlining.
The process we've been trying to use throughout this deep dive.
Correct. We have, in fact, been attempting to apply that very methodology, the synchronous dissonance, the slippage, the oscillating vocalization, and yes, this required demeanor throughout our discussion of these perilous concepts, just as Professor Fenghuang Zi socials on Jera.
#outro.
Well, what a journey. That was truly unique. One of the most thought-provoking and, yeah, oddly personal deep dives we've done because of how it loops back on itself.
He definitely stretches the brain.
Yeah, it challenges our understanding of time, causality, even just the act of observing and analyzing. From those unremembered futures subtly warping things to the danger of just thinking about what didn't happen. And then trying to navigate that with the extremely convoluted proper process.
Exactly. Well, it's a lot to take in, isn't it?
It certainly is. And maybe this raises an important final question for you, our listener, something to ponder after we finish here.
Oh, what?
How might those unremembered futures you've intensely envisioned, those big dreams, maybe averted choices that never materialized, how might they be subtly influencing your own perception of time right now? And maybe more pointedly, what risks does merely contemplating those might-have-beens, or trying to understand their absence, pose to your own internal operational timeline?
Powerful. And yeah, perhaps slightly unsettling questions to leave people with.
Food for thought, perhaps.
Definitely. We encourage you to continue your own internal deep dives into these ideas. Maybe apply the spirit of critical inquiry. Perhaps even the spirit of the proper process in your own reflections, maybe with an unctuous embrace of ambiguity.
Perhaps carefully.
Indeed. So what does this all mean for you? And how will you approach the phantom limbs of your own temporal continuum? Thank you for joining us on the Deep Dive.
Thank you.
We look forward to exploring more intriguing sources with you very soon.